All right. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust my computer on this table here. All right. So it is Sunday, which means that we have essentially a day and a half until the AP Lang exam. So I thought I would come online and answer some questions that students have. We had a great conversation last night, and I had said, each Sunday I come on around 2 p.m. Central Time, so 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm also going to go live later tonight after my kiddos go to bed and tomorrow night as well. But I wanted to take a second to just answer questions that people might have about AP Lang because I know the exam is coming up. So if you're just joining, welcome. Feel free to ask a question in the comments. One of the things to keep in mind is that for the test, you want to make sure that you are well prepared the night before. Make sure that you have everything packed. Like if you need to bring pens and pencils and if you're doing it online, you need your device, have all that ready. Make sure you know exactly where your testing room is because in some schools, it's not in a place where you typically go. So make sure that you are aware of the procedures for that morning because your test is going to start at 8 a.m. for your time zone. So you want to make sure that you are ready. But yeah, let me know what you're concerned about, what questions you might have. I've been getting a lot of kind of the same questions. So I'll just kind of start with those. I've got a lot of questions about do I need a conclusion? And the answer is no, technically you don't. Do I need to address the counter argument? And again, technically no. It can be nice to have these things, but you don't have to. Awesome. We have a question over on YouTube. I just got one on TikTok as well. So how long is the break between MCQ and FRQ? It's 10 minutes. So that's a great time to use the restroom if you need to. Some schools will let you have a snack. I know at our school they get a little bottle of water and a thing of chips or something or crackers. Let's see. Do we have to have quotes as evidence for rhetorical analysis? You do need specific evidence. It can technically be a quote or a paraphrase. Personally, I like to encourage students to have at least one quote per paragraph, usually little short quotes, just because it kind of helps you engage with the text more because you want to be analyzing why they're saying certain words or providing certain details. So it's not technically a rule that it has to be in there because they do say that you can paraphrase, but I feel like it benefits from having short quotes in there. Let's see. Okay, so we have a viewing goal here of corn. I have yet to read anyone write an essay about the corn kid, but maybe this year's prompt will lend itself to the corn kid. Okay, let's see. There was a question about advancing something, advancing commentary. So to help your commentary for rhetorical analysis, I think it's really important to recognize that in each body paragraph, you want to make sure that you're connecting the choice to the rhetorical situation. And that's going to be a few different things. That's going to be analyzing, most importantly, the message, argument, or purpose. So you want to state that explicitly because the prompt is going to ask you about one of those three things. And what happens is a lot of times students are really vague about it. They'll say, and this helps the speaker convey their message. Well, that doesn't tell us what the message is. It also doesn't tell us why the message is important for the audience. So you really want to be analyzing why are they making this choice for this audience on this occasion. And so that's a way to advance your commentary is to really be thinking about the relevance of the purpose, message, or argument. I feel like they've been asking a lot more about message and purpose lately. So maybe this year's prompt will be argument. I don't know. But the difference, in case you're curious, is so all passages have a purpose. So regardless of whether or not it says message or argument, you can still write about purpose. In fact, you should. You should know why they're doing what they're doing. But message is more like a lesson or a takeaway, whereas an argument is them trying to be persuasive. So typically it either has a message or an argument, not typically both in one passage. So that would be my best advice. If you go on YouTube and you search for Coach Hall Writes My Best Tip for Rhetorical Analysis, I have a whole video that kind of breaks this down in more detail about how to advance your commentary. But that would be my best tip is make sure that you're connecting to the rhetorical situation and really analyzing. And if you do it super well, it doesn't just help your commentary, but it can add sophistication to your essay. I also have a video about rhetorical analysis sentence frames that help you do this. So if you're like, yeah, I get what the rhetorical situation is, like I've done soapstone or I've done space cat, but I don't really know how to weave it into my essay. Sorry, that's my dog. Apparently our neighbor's dog is also out. So apparently they're okay. So I would look at that rhetorical analysis sentence frames video because that will help you as well. Just kind of know how to put it all together, because I feel like that's where students get stuck. How many paragraphs should I write? Well, you need an intro. It doesn't have to be a full paragraph, but you need an intro and then minimum 2 body paragraphs. Some students do 3. I don't feel ready for the exam, but I will still take it this year since it's already paid for. I was going to take it next year again. Is that sensible? I think so. Our school, like I live in a state where the state board of education pays for students' tests. So I understand it can be frustrating to pay for something and then like not be successful on it. But so I've never had a student retake it the next year because most of my students go into AP Lit and they take that test. But if you kind of want to use this as a trial run and you're like, yeah, I can study more next year. I can get a better understanding of it next year. I think that's totally fine. I would say though, like, don't count yourself out just yet because, like, quite frankly, you still have time to prepare. So there's like the question of, okay, what do we do? What do we do over the next like 24-ish, 24 to 48, I guess, hours? I would probably say that it's better to work on the FRQs because I feel like you have more control over those. So if I had to pick one, I would say work on your FRQs. Now, how do you do that? If you're self-studying or if you're just trying to supplement what you're doing in class, I would say the first thing you should do is look at released samples from the College Board. So start with the more recent prompts like 2021 and 2022. 2020 was only rhetorical analysis because of COVID. And then the 2018 and 2019 prompts were rescored. But those are kind of similar to what they do now. So they'll have it with a 9-point rubric, which is the old rubric, and then a 6-point rubric. If you can find the stuff with the 6-point rubric, that's going to be more helpful to you. But I would look at recent ones and I would compare your writing to the writing in those samples. And I would really look at essays that score a 4 out of 6 or higher. And kind of think about, okay, what did they do and how can I do that? I would also encourage you to maybe pick one essay of the 3 to start with. Like, which one do I feel like I can, which one am I like best at, but I need a little help with? Or maybe look at it the other way. Maybe be like, okay, which one is the worst where I need a big boost and how can I do that? And I have videos on my YouTube channel and my TikTok as well to help with that. If you're looking for like deep tips, I would go to YouTube. If you're looking for quick tips, I would go to TikTok. Is the 15 minutes for reading sources? Yeah, so you can actually start writing during that time. They used to say that you could only read, and like then they realized that that doesn't make sense because even like we teach you to annotate, and then it's like, here you can read, but you can't write anything. So no, you can start writing during that time. So quite literally for the FRQs, you have 2 hours and 15 minutes to divide up however you want to. So if you want to start with synthesis first, most students do just because it's the most time consuming. I tell my own students, try not to spend the whole 15 minutes with synthesis because a lot of them don't need to. They can kind of read the sources and plan in about 10 minutes. But a lot of my students need about 45 minutes for rhetorical analysis. So they just kind of bank those 5 minutes and put it towards RA. I think a lot of students just in general can maybe do an argument essay in less than 40 minutes if you really had to. So that's something to consider as well, is like, what order do you want to take the test in to try to maximize your score? How many pages should you write per essay? So I have this theory, and I know someone last night commented that their teacher said something similar, and it's not a rule, but hear me out on this. When I see an essay that like is front, like one side, and then it's like not even all the way to like full on the back, I'm like, this is probably going to be a 3 out of 6. And I have yet to be proven wrong with my own students. Now, I can't say that like for everybody, this is the case. But I like them to do at least like a full page front and back, and then ideally go on to the next page. And I say that because usually, regardless of the size of your handwriting, if you're doing like a page and a half for your essay, you have not developed enough. The only exception I could see to this is if it's literally not a finished essay. Like, let's say you have a page and a half, but it's like an intro and like one body paragraph and you barely started the other one, but like had you finished in that case, it would have been longer. So if you have like a 3 to 4 paragraph essay and it's a page and a half, in my opinion, that's too short. If you're taking the exam digitally, do you need to bring your own device? Please check with your school because I think it's different for each thing. Like, we are not doing it digitally, so I don't know, but please check with your school because a lot of schools like um they well, I don't know. I feel like a lot of schools now have like iPads or Chromebooks or some kind of device that like students get one to one, like individually. So, like I'm assuming that the school either has a device for you or your school device has like the Blue Book application stuff on it. So please check with your school because it's going to be different for everybody. Let's see. Okay, that's my dog. Can we only do 2 body paragraphs? Yes, you can only do like it's okay to do 2 body paragraphs. Do you think the synthesis essay is the easiest to net all 5 points for? For most students, possibly in the sense that synthesis typically has the highest average of the 3 essays, but I also think that it partially has the highest average because a lot of students do it first. So it's like fresh, like they're not tired. But I guess in theory, I feel like a lot of students feel like synthesis is the easiest because they have the sources and so they kind of know how to do it. But I also think it's an individual thing because me personally, and I know I'm not a student, I'm a teacher, but if you're like, I need you to get a 5 out of 6 on an essay, I'm going to ask for a rhetorical analysis prompt every single time because that's my favorite. So, yes, I could see how for most people synthesis would be the easiest, but I don't think it's true for everybody. Okay. Is it better to concentrate heavily on 2 essays and kind of write a mid-level one for the third? That's a great question. I think it kind of depends mathematically because here's the thing. So your multiple choice is going to be worth 1 point each. Okay. Then your essays, you're going to, if you want to do your own math, you're going to take your whatever the score is out of 6. So let's say you get straight fours. That's going to be 12 points. You're going to multiply that by 3.0566. Now, if you're like, I could get a 4, like super easily, but if I spend more time on the other 2, I could raise 2 of them to a 5 and you're like a 5, and a 4. Yeah, that's great. But what happens if you have like I don't know, like a 5 and then a 4 and a 3, like you're still ending up with like you might end up with the same number. So even if you focus your attention on 2 of the 3 essays, I see where you're going with that question. I like that thinking. My fear is that, or like my caveat, I guess, would be that you still want to aim for at least a 3 out of 6, if not a 4 out of 6 on like this other essay. So here's what I would recommend in that case. And this is kind of like my recommendation for like if you feel like you're running out of time in general. Let's say worst case scenario, you have 20 to 30 minutes left and you just are starting your third essay. You're like, I have to do this whole thing in 20 or 30 minutes. Do not write a long intro. Literally just put a thesis, like thesis. Just get that thesis point and then write a solid body paragraph. Like develop as much as you can. So you have a claim, you have evidence, you have like multiple sentences of commentary, ideally another layer of evidence and commentary and a concluding sentence. And like at least that you should get a 120. If that paragraph is amazing, you can maybe be considered for higher. And then I would start a second paragraph. And if you don't finish it, at least you have essentially started another claim. And so again, that would potentially help. So I like the idea of what you asked over there. I don't know. You'd have to play around with the math to see if it would really work out. Let's see. Do we have to read all the sources for synthesis? So there's in years past there's been 6. The College Board has technically said 6 to 8. I think they tend to do 6 because it's more manageable. Also with like copyright and stuff, I feel like it's easier for them to get 6 sources, but that's just my speculation there. So you technically don't have to read them all. I tell my students if you know you're not going to use it, like stop reading it. If it's something that you don't understand, like let's say it's a picture or a visual text and you're like, I don't get it. Like, I don't know how this fits into the conversation, especially if it's like one of the first couple sources, skip it and come back to it. Because usually the picture or the chart or whatever it is makes more sense later. once you've read the other sources, because you're like, oh yeah, like for instance, in the cursive writing one, source B was a cursive writing worksheet. Like you don't need to annotate that. Like you just like it's a worksheet. But you're like, it might be confusing as to how am I going to use this? Well, if you read other sources, some of them talk about fine motor skills. Okay, well, you need fine motor skills to write cursive. So you can reference the fine motor skills in the worksheet and pair those together. Or let's say, I don't remember if one of the sources said this, but let's say one of the sources talked about how cursive is boring. Well, you could talk about how like these worksheets are super boring, and then you could pair those together. Another example of this is in the wind farm prompt. The first source is a picture of a wind farm, which I think is actually smart on their part to do it there, because I feel like they need kids to have the visual of this is what it looks like. And I say that because I don't live near a wind farm. So I don't know that year if my students knew what it was without the picture. However, when I give that to my students, now I'm like, okay, what does this picture show? And they usually tell me things like, okay, well, we can see that it needs a lot of space. We can see that there's a mountain in the background. So just kind of ask yourself, okay, like what's this picture actually showing? And then you can know how to use it later. But I tell them when I give them this, like, okay, I'm talking you through it in class, but on the exam, if you saw the picture and you're like, oh, that's a wind farm, but you didn't know what to do with it, move on and come back to it. Another way to speed up the sources too, if you're like, I'm a really slow reader, some of the sources have multiple paragraphs, like, and they're kind of chunky paragraphs, but there's a lot of them. Some of them, it's like a bunch of short paragraphs. So with the longer ones, what you can do is like read the first paragraph and then just look at the topic sentences for each of the remaining paragraphs. So that way you kind of know, okay, here's a structure of what this particular source says. And then you can decide from there, like, yes, I'm going to use this source, or no, I'm not. So you're kind of skimming it. So that would be, I think, helpful too. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure you have 3 sources for synthesis, and please cite them clearly, because sometimes I was working with a student earlier who had quoted something and like didn't cite it. And thankfully it had 3 citations in the essay. It has to be different sources. So if I cite source A, source B, source C, I'm good. That's 3 different sources. But if I do A, B, A, then that's only 2. So you want to make sure that like if you're quoting something that you're attributing it to a source, or if you're paraphrasing something that you're attributing it to a source. Like I would almost rather people like oversight than undercite. Like make sure you have 3 different sources. Thank you for following. How do I write a thesis for evaluate the extent to which? Okay, so when it's evaluating the extent to which, it's kind of like thinking of it on a continuum. So in class, I'll usually draw like a double-sided arrow, and I'll have my students we'll put it on the board. And one of the prompts we did this year was like, to what extent should kindergarten be a more academic environment? And so on one side of the arrow, it was like extremely academic, or like completely revolutionize everything. And then on the other side, it was like not very academic at all, like go back to playtime, that kind of thing. And so to what extent means like, where are we on this continuum? And we typically want to avoid the extremes. We want to avoid the always and the never, or like the extremely and the rarely. We want to be like maybe close to one side or close to the other side. But that way, when it's to what extent, you're able to think of it with a little bit of nuance. Like, so for that kindergarten prompt, several of my students argued that while it is important to focus on academic goals in kindergarten, the social emotional growth that comes with playtime is much more crucial to students at that age. Therefore, kindergarten should not be an entirely academic environment. And so that's saying to what extent, like partially, but not entirely. And so that's how you answer the to what extent, if that makes sense. Okay, let's see. We got a couple of questions here on YouTube. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, I take the AP test on Tuesday. Do you know what I can expect? Because I took English last semester. My teacher just barely told me about it this week. First of all, I'm so sorry that you're in that situation where you're having to cram. I can tell you plenty of things to expect. I have an entire YouTube channel of it. So let me tell you the lowdown of what your test is going to be like in terms of format. But please know that I have several videos. If you're like, oh, she just told me this type of essay and I don't even know what that is, I have several videos to help as well. So on test day, your test is going to start at 8 a.m. I would get there early. the very first thing you're going to do when you get in the room and take a seat is the proctor is going to start talking about the test and testing security and the do's and don'ts and all that. That can take 10 to 15 minutes, I guess. The very first portion of the test that you're going to complete is a multiple choice section. And so you're going to have two things on your desk. You're going to have a booklet that has the passages, and then you're going to have essentially like a bubble sheet. And if I'm not mistaken, what they do is like they reprint the passage. Someone can tell me if I'm wrong about this, like if you've taken an AP test this year. But the way they do it typically on AP Classroom is like the passage is on one side, the questions are on the other. And then if you flip the page, they have the passage again. So that way you don't have to like keep going back. But then the downside is it's like less flipping of pages. But then if you annotate it on the first page, you have to flip. So anyway, point is that you have your multiple choice passages and then you have your answer sheet. You're going to need a number 2 pencil, not mechanical pencil, for that answer sheet. There are going to be there are going to be 2 reading passages. The first 2 passages, because there are 5 total, the first 2 are reading comprehension. Those take longer for most students. They are longer passages, they have more questions, and honestly, students tend to score lower on those anyway. Not that everyone does poorly on it, because people do very well, but it's reading comprehension, nonfiction. The last 3 passages are the newer questions. These are called the writing MCQ. These are more like editing. So these passages at the top are going to say this is a draft, and it's going to be a pretty short passage, like a few paragraphs. And the questions are all going to be about like the writer wants to add a sentence, should they do so, or choosing a transition word or things like that. So those are the ones that many students tend to do better on. So that's your MCQ section. You have 45 minutes, or sorry, scratch that. You have 1 hour to answer 45 questions. Each question's worth 1 point. Then you get a 10-minute break. That's a great time to use the restroom or to get a snack. And then you have 2 hours and 15 minutes to write the essays. So they're going to recommend that you spend approximately 15 minutes reading and 40 minutes for each of your essays. Your essays are going to appear in the order of synthesis, rhetorical analysis, and argument, but you can write them in any order. Okay. So hopefully that was like a quick walkthrough of what to expect on test day. Do you recommend to do a walkthrough of the passage for the rhetorical analysis essay? Okay, what do you mean by walkthrough of the passage? Because I don't want to say yes or no, because I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Like, do you mean like annotate, or do you mean like outline your essay in advance? Because if so, yes. But if you mean like skim the passage first, then I do think you need to read it closely. Thank you for sharing the live. Can you talk about the different rhetorical strategies? Oh, can I talk about different rhetorical strategies if it's not mentioned in the thesis? Well, okay, be careful with that, because it kind of depends on what you mean. Like if you mean making it like a whole new main idea of a paragraph, if it's not in your thesis, then you really want to make sure that your body paragraphs prove your thesis. So you want to make sure that your evidence and commentary proves your thesis. So you don't necessarily want to talk about something that's not in your thesis. That being said, for instance, if you're going to talk about word choice creates tone. So you could talk about the tone that the word choice creates in your word choice paragraph, and you wouldn't have to say tone in your thesis, because it's kind of like a secondary thing. So if that's what you mean, then yeah, you don't have to cram everything into your thesis. But I wouldn't bring up like this whole new main idea that isn't supported in your thesis. Should I read the full text of the rhetorical essay? Absolutely, because you could miss stuff if you don't. I would not skim the rhetorical analysis. I would actually read the whole thing, because a lot of times what happens if people skim it is they miss little details that actually help. Any suggestions for how many rhetorical devices I should memorize for the test? Don't bother memorizing rhetorical devices per se. You want to know the major rhetorical devices and rhetorical choices, but just know that you're going to be asked about rhetorical choices. The difference is a rhetorical choice is what the author does. It's a verb, whereas a rhetorical device is a noun. So please do not spend your weekend memorizing things like asyndeton, polysyndeton, anaphora, epistrophe. If you're like, I don't even know what those are, that's okay. Because it is much better to use rhetorically accurate verbs. So that's what I would be looking at, is some of the more common ones, like repetition, you could say repeats, comparison, you can say compares, contrast can be a verb as well. juxtaposes. Like you want to be practicing using strong verbs. Don't try to memorize all these obscure devices because it's just not worth it. Is it better for your RA essay to be device led or argument led? Not device led per se. If you mean what I think you mean, I encourage what I call a chronological approach, which I think is what you mean by argument led. So I encourage students, if possible, to look at it as what are they doing in the beginning, the middle, and the end. So following the speaker's line of reasoning. Device driven essays tend to be like, I saw a bunch of repetition throughout this speech, so I'm just going to do a whole paragraph about repetition. And I'm like, and it's kind of like a choose your own adventure, or like, where's Waldo? Like, where's the repetition? It's not that that's a bad way to approach it. In fact, a lot of teachers used to teach it that way, but like since they started really focusing on line of reasoning, we've kind of switched to a more chronological approach. I've heard it's like the SAT, but it seems harder. I would agree with that. Do AP readers prefer quantity over quality when it comes to the no, we want quality. We want you to write a better essay. We don't want you to try to throw in everything in the kitchen sink. And that goes for like paragraphs as well. I tell my students, I would much rather see you write 2 developed body paragraphs, like long, thorough, you left nothing unsaid body paragraphs, than 3 mediocre ones. Because usually when I like now, have I read essays where students have had 3 super developed body paragraphs? Yes. But usually what happens in a time situation with 3 body paragraphs, and this is again, like not all the time, but sometimes what happens is one of the body paragraphs or more is underdeveloped, and you kind of wonder, okay, but if they had just done 2 body paragraphs and used the time that they were writing the third to develop the other 2, would this have impacted their score? What would you say are the best rhetorical devices we should practice? So practice as far as like knowing them, I would say some of the most common are repetition, comparison, contrast, anecdotes. Illusion can be common, but sometimes it's really hard to actually write about the illusion like thoroughly. Word choice and how it creates tone. Those are kind of some of the major ones, but you also need to recognize that a rhetorical choice can be a verb. So like, if you're like, I don't know what choice is here, just ask yourself, what are they doing? Are they flattering their audience? If so, that's a choice. Are they criticizing their audience? That's a choice. Are they like rallying the crowd? That's a choice. So just ask yourself, what are they doing? And you can write about that. Like you can write about it in more plain language if you need to. Okay, sorry, I don't invite students to join the live just because I don't know what y'all might come on and say. I'm going into AP Lang next year. What should I do to prepare? That's a great question. I would recommend that you follow here if you're not already doing so, and follow on YouTube. I'll talk more about how to prepare, and I do have some videos about how to prepare later. Right now, we're reviewing for this year's test, so I want to make sure I'm answering questions about the upcoming exam. But thank you so much for your interest. Please make sure you're following. That way, over the summer, I can help you prepare for next year. And also, just as a side note, because a lot of you are currently in the class, please do me a favor if you can. If you know some students in the grade below you or whomever that are taking the test next year, if they're taking AP Lang, let them know, hey, there's this person on YouTube and TikTok, Coach Hall. She makes videos. They're really helpful. You should follow her. And also for those of you that are juniors, over the summer, I will still be talking about how to prepare for AP Lang, but a lot of my content is also going to be geared towards college applications. So as soon as the test is over, don't just unfollow or unsubscribe, because I do have more things that I hopefully can help you with over the summer. Because there's other types of writing besides AP Lang writing. Some of you might have to write personal statements and stuff too. All right. Hey, Tom, are we given 15 minutes to review all the passages? Technically, yes. Like they give you what they call a recommended reading period that is 15 minutes. Now you can divide that time up however you want to. How many sentences should evidence be in commentary? If I had to put numbers on it, I would say probably a minimum of 1 sentence of evidence, but possibly 2. Like for rhetorical analysis, I could see it being 1. For synthesis, I could see it being 1. For argument, it should not be 1 because you're going to have to explain it. So, just to clarify there. So, for argument, I would want to see 2 or even 3 sentences of explaining the evidence. Now, commentary, I like to see 3 sentences of commentary per piece of evidence if I can. How do I write fast? Don't worry about spelling or grammar, just go. Please make sure that if you're writing, like literally writing quickly though, that your handwriting is legible. But don't worry about spelling or grammar on test day. Because first of all, you're human, it's a rough draft. Like we get it. I know they say something about spelling and grammar in one of the bullet points, but I really wish they would take that out. I don't think it's necessary. Because like you can have mistakes and you'll still be fine. How much time do we realistically have to write? So it kind of depends on how long it takes you to read and plan. So I would say they recommend 15 minutes to read and 40 to write. I tell my students, well, granted, most of my students do it this way. And I have some that are doing it totally different this year, but we won't get into that because they're doing what's best for them. But many of my students, the way we prep for it all year is they spend about 10 minutes reading and planning synthesis, 40 minutes writing it. So they don't use the whole 15-minute reading period. They save 5 minutes. That's because they need 5 to 10 to read and plan rhetorical analysis. And then they have the remaining, what would it be? 40 to 45 to write. And then argument, that saves them 45 minutes. So they usually spend about 3 to 5 minutes planning that one, and then the remaining time writing. So that's kind of how a lot of my students break it up and have in the past, but you could do it differently. You also don't have to write the essays in order. So prioritize your top 2 and put your weakest one last, just because in my opinion, like it's better to put your weak one last, because if you're going to rush anything, rush the one that you're like not super good at anyway, because you can get a 1-2-0, so 3 out of 6 relatively quickly. So you can still get points just by like kind of throwing it together. I hate to say that, but it's true. Thank you for suggesting to watch my videos. I'm glad that they're helpful. Let's see. Do you have any tips for analyzing the author's rhetorical choices? Yes. So really ask yourself, why are they making this choice for this audience on this occasion? We need to think about the rhetorical situation. So that would be, if you're familiar with the acronym SPACE CAT, speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence. The space part, not the cat part, but the space part is the rhetorical situation. If your teacher uses the acronym SOAPstone, it's the SOAP part. So speaker, occasion, audience, purpose. We want to be thinking about, why is this person making these choices for this audience on this occasion? Because they're tailoring their message, argument, or purpose to their audience. So we want to ask ourselves, okay, what does our speaker value? What does our audience value? Do they value the same thing? Because if yes, then that makes the speaker's job easier. If the answer is no, their job is harder. We also want to ask ourselves about the occasion, because the passage, if it's a speech, it could be an inaugural address. It could be a State of the Union. It could be a eulogy, which is a funeral. It could be a commencement speech, which is a graduation speech. It could just be a speech at a convention, like the DNC, Democratic National Convention, RNC, Republican National Convention. It could be just somebody speaking at, like, I don't know, like some kind of country fair or something. I don't, like, whatever it is. If it's a letter, there's still an occasion there. Presumably there's a reason why they're writing the letter. Like, did they receive a letter and then they're writing back? Or are they starting the conversation? Things like that. So we want to consider this in order to help our commentary, and also to recognize that they're making choices based on all of these factors. Because, like, for instance, if I was asked, hopefully this would not happen to anyone like soon, but if I ever had to write a eulogy for somebody, like, I would make different choices because that's a funeral. But if I was asked to give a commencement speech at someone's graduation ceremony, totally different audience and occasion, I would make different choices. So we want to make sure that we're considering that as we do that. Someone said, "Oh, what?" Was that when I started talking about Space Cat and Soapstone? Because if so, I can clarify that again. But I don't know what the "oh, what" means. You're welcome, Aaron. Do you have a good thesis for rhetorical analysis essay. I have like a template or like a sentence frame that I give my students. It's basically in like his or her tone. So what, like, use an adjective, like, is it passionate? Is it bold? Is it patriotic? And then like speech, letter, whatever the type of passage is, and then the speaker. And ideally you'll give their credentials, like Sonia Sotomayor, comma, appeals court judge, comma, because at the time she was one. Now she's a Supreme Court justice. Or President so-and-so. So tell us who they are. So you're going to say, like, in his or her tone, speech, letter, whatever it is, speaker, and then tell us what they do. So choice 1 and choice 2, ideally with strong verbs. And then you're going to say in order to, and you're going to give us the purpose. If you do that, you'll get the thesis point. Would you recommend trying to get the sophistication points? Only if, well, okay, you can try for it, and if you don't get it, it should still help the quality of your essay, like sometimes even your commentary. But as far as like, if you're not used to getting it, but you've kind of always been close, I would maybe pick one of the 3 essays to try it for on test day if you feel like you can. But like for most students, I wish the sophistication point just like was a non-factor. Like really focus on your evidence and commentary. How should the rhetorical analysis essay be formatted? I prefer a chronological approach. So the speaker begins by making this choice. They continue by making this choice. They conclude by making this choice. Should we order our body paragraphs in the order of importance, or should we do it chronologically? Yeah, chronologically. Because it sounds odd when people are like, the most important choice they make is this. Like, I mean, I guess that is an argument. Like, it is debatable, but it's cringy to teachers. So do it chronologically. How do I find the effect of a rhetorical device on the audience? I would ask yourself, like, okay, like, how does the speaker want them to feel? Or like, how would you feel in that situation if you were the audience? Like, don't say that. Don't say I would feel this way, but like, try to think about, okay, what are they trying to get them to feel? That's usually based on their purpose. Like, if they're trying to like encourage them or motivate them, they want them to feel inspired or uplifted. So that can help as well. Do you have any tips in the possibility that nothing is coming to mind for evidence for argument? Okay. The best advice I could give you for argument, if you're like totally stuck, is you gotta try something. And I know that's not like super helpful, but choose something that you know. So I had an experience where I was working with a tutoring student earlier, and she chose to write the artifice prompt, which is one of my least favorite prompts. And it's one of my least favorite prompts because a lot of students don't understand what the word artifice is. And technically there's context clues in the prompt, but I really feel like they just should have defined it for students. So the student said, I wrote this essay. I don't know what artifice is, but the closest thing I could come up with was lying. So I wrote the essay as if it was about lying. And I used the word artifice though, but my examples were really based on like lying. Okay. So they just kind of went with it. And quite frankly, like it was close enough that the essay would have been at least a 130, because even though they sort of misunderstood what artifice was, they kind of in 1 or 2 spots, they made it work. And so ask yourself, what can I write about well? And just kind of go from there. Like, so if they ask you about like some open-ended topic, like I'm trying to think of something they haven't done, courage, okay, when have I shown courage? Ask yourself that. You could write about personal experience. Who in history do I know of that has shown courage? And you could write about that. The one thing that worries me, and I don't know if they're going to do this, and I certainly don't want to jinx it, is I'm like, a lot of the prompts lately have been philosophical, where it's like writing about timely decisions, writing about disobedience, striving for perfection. I'm worried that one year they're just going to be like, write about the value of, I don't know, a cell phone ban in schools. Now, if that's the case, I'm sure all of you have tons of opinions on that. So you would probably have to rely on personal experience and observation. A cell phone ban would not work because, and then you could tell us what happens in school. So, start with the idea of chores and kind of work from there, but you got to put something down. Because even if it's shaky evidence, you can still get points. It's better than leaving it blank. Yeah, someone said I would use personal anecdotes. They're not going to fact check you. So, like, that's probably the best way to start. There are some prompts that personal anecdotes just don't fit with well, but like to be honest, a lot of the prompts lately have lent themselves to personal experience. What's the best way to study within the next 2 days if we haven't started yet? Um, I would focus on the FRQs because I don't feel like there's really an effective way to study for multiple choice. Like you can practice it, but I just don't feel like that's the best use of your time. So, shameless plug here, but if you are looking to study, I have several YouTube videos from the past like 4 years. Start with the more recent ones from like the last 2 years if you can. But if chances are, if it is relevant to AP Lang, I've done a video on it at some point, and I personally would love the support. Also, I have 2 years worth of content on TikTok. So you can start there. So if you have quick questions that you want answered, that would be one way to do it. For those who don't know me, my name is Coach Hall. I'm an AP Lang teacher from Arkansas, and I have produced content for AP Lang for the past, like online, for the past several years, helping students study. And I've also been an AP reader for the past couple years, and I will be furthering my AP consulting in the next year or so. Got some opportunities there that I'm pretty excited about. So I know my stuff pretty well. My students do very well on the exam, so I'd love to help you study. Also, on a more practical note, if you're like, okay, that's great, but like, what can I do besides watching your videos? I would look at some of the College Board sample essays, particularly the ones from recent years. Start with 2022 and 2021. They're going to, if you type in AP Lang past exam prompts, you're going to see that there's like the prompt, if you've never seen it before, that's in one PDF. The sample essays are in another. And then you're going to need to download or click on the document that says scoring commentary, because that's going to tell you like how they scored it, what score it received. And that way you want to be looking at anything that scores a total of 4 out of 6 or higher. So like a 130 or higher. I would also look at the 120 because that's kind of what we don't want to do. So you can see the difference between like what gets a 1-2 versus a 1-3. And I think that can help. I would also maybe, since it's like Sunday afternoon, for most people, depending on your time zone, I would maybe practice writing one essay if you haven't done so in class recently. But yeah, that's how I would study if I were cramming. Let's see. What's the best way to earn the complexity point? So the sophistication point for rhetorical analysis, we typically see students earn it because they're really connecting the rhetorical choice to the rhetorical situation and situating it in a broader context. For rhetorical analysis, the second most common way is analyzing complexity and tension. The way we see it the least is the vivid and descriptive style. Not saying it can't be done, it's just hard. So to improve your style, focus on adding in advanced punctuation meaningfully. So colons, semicolons, dashes, add in adjectives and adverbs to make your writing more precise. So for instance, instead of saying he states, like that's boring, say he boldly claims, or he boldly asserts, or he logically claims, or something like that. That alone is not going to help your score get the sophistication point, but it does help your writing. Also know that you can make rhetorical choices. So one of my students this year, something that she tends to do, she doesn't do it all the time, but she's been doing it lately and it's been working very well for argument, is she starts with an anecdote. Like she starts with a personal experience that is relevant to the prompt, and she kind of like uses that as her hook, and then it builds to her thesis. And for her, it works well. Now, I'm not saying everybody should try this, because it's kind of like you can if you want to. She started doing this because I showed them an essay from, it was 2018, and it was one of the rescored essays, and it was about exploring the unknown. And the person wrote a paragraph about how they explored the unknown by trying a ropes course for the first time. And so it was like kind of like a little narrative. And this particular student was like, yeah, I really like this technique. So I had everyone try it for that. They wrote that essay, and I was like, I want you to start with an anecdote. And then some students were like, yep, not doing that again if I don't have to. And other students were like, oh, this is kind of cool. So they make their own rhetorical choice. But again, like if you're interested in creative writing, I feel like the vivid and descriptive style is meant for you. If you're on YouTube, I have a video for rhetorical analysis sophistication that's pretty recent, within the last month. I would definitely check out that video for more tips. How much time should I spend outlining versus writing? It kind of depends on the essay we're talking about, but like I feel like for synthesis, it probably takes about 10 minutes to read and plan. So rhetorical analysis, 5 to 10. And then I feel like most people can do argument in about 5. So then the remaining time would be writing. But you should definitely have an outline. Like you want to make sure that you like know what your thesis is and your main ideas are. That way you don't get stuck halfway through. All right, awesome. So let's answer a few more questions. So please, if you're watching on YouTube, I would love it if you would give this live a thumbs up. If you are watching on TikTok, feel free to tap your screen. We're also trying to go for a goal for getting 20 corn on the live. So if you want to gift a corn, that would be cool. Every time I hear corn, I have that like that little kid's audio, like the, it's corn in my head. I don't know what the appealing prompt is this year, but if anyone can work in the corn kid, that'd be funny. Maybe wouldn't help your essay. I don't know, but you can reference pop culture in argument. How many pieces of evidence do we need for each essay? So I recommend in most cases 2 per paragraph. That's not a rule because there are exceptions, but 2 per paragraph is kind of a good place to start. Can you get timers? You have to be really careful with that because I was reading something that said there's something in the directions that does not allow like a timer, but you can have a watch as long as it's not a smart watch. And there is supposed to be something in the like a clock in the testing room. I tell my students for our school to get a watch, like a cheap one, inexpensive one, I should say, at Walmart. A lot of my students get like the kid watches. Like one year we had like a football player show up with like an LOL dolls one. It was kind of funny. But yeah, the reason why is because they're like $5 to $10 with, they used to be 5. Now they're probably closer to 10. But you can't have a watch that sends or receives messages. But the reason why I tell my students to get one if they can, especially if they're taking multiple AP tests, is because we have clocks that like they bring into the room, but there's no place to hang it. And so you have to kind of prop it up on like the board, like the ledge of the dry erase board or like on a table. And so the kids in the back can barely see it. Also, quite frankly, I've had some students tell me in the past, hey, like, I'm so used to digital that these analog clocks are like, they tell me the old timer clocks. I can't read them quickly or well, and I get the time messed up. So like, I just don't look at it. So that's why I think bringing your own watch could help. How do you write an intro for an argument essay? You really don't need a long one for the argument essay. Like I wouldn't really worry about it too much. Some people kind of start with like a general overview of the topic, but for out of all the essays, I feel like argument is the one where you could probably just dive right in if you had to. Is it possible to get a 6 if you only write 2 body paragraphs and not 3? Absolutely, because there's nothing that says that you have to write 3 to get sophistication. How should I write the intro to rhetorical analysis? That's a great question. Thank you for asking over on YouTube. I would say your intro should be short, but maybe strive for about 2 to 3 sentences. You want to tell us what the rhetorical situation is and then give us a thesis. Now, could you cram all of this into one sentence? Yes. However, it sometimes helps if you provide like the historical context. So if you know like what was going on in the world at the time, tell us who's speaking and to whom they're speaking, and then give us your thesis with the choices. If you want a more detailed intro than that, you can do one because some students try to go for sophistication by trying to acknowledge like the broader context and stuff, but really under pressure, like 2 to 3 sentences is fine. Do you know where to find any practice MCQs online? There is, so official ones, the only official ones that I know of that are out there that are available to everybody are, if you search for something called the AP Lang course exam description. It's this PDF for teachers and it's like 150 pages. Go to page, I think it's like 122. There's going to be 17 multiple choice questions. If you haven't seen them, they're sort of easy in my opinion, but those are good. And if you keep scrolling, the answer key is there. So that's where I would start. There's also, I believe Marco Learning has a practice test. If you, I think you have to enter your email and then they give you a practice test, which I think is relatively good. I've used it or had like some tutoring students used it with success. Also, my friend Tim Freitas from the Garden of English has something called the Ultimate Review Packet. That one is not free, but it is very high quality for the price. And it's very fairly priced for the quality. And he has 2 full multiple choice tests in there. Tim is incredibly talented with AP Lang, and I would trust that his questions are very close to the quality that the College Board writes. So those would be my recommendations for that. Is a conclusion paragraph really needed? No. No, it's not. You can end your essay with a body paragraph and it's okay. What's an example of incorporating the rhetorical situation into your intro? So for instance, it'd be easier if I could just like read one. I have a couple sample essays online. Let me see if I can like find one real quick. But basically it's probably easier if you pull up a sample essay that's scored well, or one of my videos. But basically you want to, like, let's take what would be a good one to do. Let's take the Florence Kelley prompt. So if you're not familiar with that one, it was from 1905. Florence Kelley was speaking at a women's suffrage convention about child labor. So the convention was about women's right to vote, but her speech was about child labor. So you could start with kind of like a general overview, like, at the turn of the, what would it be, 20th century, many children did not go to school all day. Instead, they spent their nights working tirelessly in factories to make garments for adults, or whatever you want to say. Like, so that could be like your context. Like, here's what was happening in the world. Now that sentence is not totally necessary, but it can help. Then you could say, in 1905, Florence Kelley spoke at a women's suffrage convention in, what was it, Philadelphia, arguing against the injustices of child labor. So that's kind of telling us, okay, that's the situation. That's not a thesis because I didn't tell you what choices she made. So then you could build to say something like, in her passionate speech to the suffragettes, Florence Kelley, and then you have choice 1, choice 2, and order 2, and then you have her purpose. So that would be a way to like integrate the rhetorical situation. So hopefully me just kind of like rambling it off the top of my head helps. How do you write an intro for a synthesis essay? So basically, there's different ways to do it. You can define the topic. Last year it was STEM, and so many people defined STEM. They're like STEM, comma, science, technology, engineering, math. Like, if it's an acronym that we all sort of are supposed to know, you don't have to define it. But one that might be helpful to define would be like, if the topic is something that like means different things to different people, maybe offer a definition if you need to. You could also talk about like why the issue is relevant in society today. So a lot of times we'll see sentences that they're kind of empty sentences, but because you can kind of use this for so many topics. But like, I see a lot of times students starting like, insert topic here is a highly debated topic today. So I tend not to like that as an intro, but like, I don't take points off in my classroom for it. It's just like, literally, I've read that for cursive is a highly prevalent topic today. STEM, highly, like, so that's one way that people do it. The other thing that people sometimes do is they look at like both sides. Like, some people say this, some people say this, and then they have their thesis. So those are some ways that you could start. How do you get a 4 on evidence instead of a 3? You have to be consistent in proving all your claims. So if you have 2 body paragraphs, they both have to be equally good with plenty of commentary. Will you do a general review the night before the exam? I will. I'm actually doing a live review on Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's not gonna be on my channel initially. It's gonna be on Garden of English with Tim Freitas. He and I have done previous reviews this year and last year. They're on his channel. So if we did one about multiple choice, one about synthesis, one about rhetorical analysis. So we've covered all of the stuff in detail. So you can definitely go check out those. And then also, so my plan that night is, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to go stream it on TikTok because if I'm on my computer Zooming with him and it's on his YouTube channel, I can't go live on my YouTube channel, but I can go live on my TikTok. And so for those that are watching on TikTok, I'm going to try to like flip my camera and like have it that way. I don't know if the sound quality is going to be good, but we're going to try. Tim and I agreed we would spend like an hour to 2 hours online. I intend to go live later that night as well, on both YouTube and TikTok. Last year I was up till like 1 a.m. answering questions. So yes, please make sure you're following Coach Hall Writes on whichever respective platform it is, whether it's YouTube or TikTok, so that way you get notified when I go live. But yes, I will definitely do something the night before the exam. I'm also going to go live later tonight, probably around 9 p.m. Eastern time-ish. It just depends on what time my kids go to bed. Can students choose a rhetorical device as one of their choices for rhetorical essay? Nate, I'm not totally sure I understand your question. Maybe could you ask it again? I don't know if there's like a typo or if I'm just misunderstanding your question. If I am, okay, so can my students choose a rhetorical device as one of their rhetorical choices for an RA template? Okay, so do you mean like can students use a device instead of a choice? Meaning like can they use a noun and not a verb? Yes. If we see them using nouns, we don't take points off. We just prefer that it's a verb. Okay, great. Are timers allowed? I believe not. I believe you can only have a watch that doesn't send or receive messages. So no, I don't think timers are allowed. Because I read a post earlier saying that they weren't, so I wouldn't just show up with a timer. Someone was asking earlier on like online about like stopwatches and timers, and someone had shown something from like one of the things from the College Board that said you can't have it. Are there any blanket rhetorical devices we can use? So sort of word choices and everything. So there's that. And word choice creates tone. Some of the more common devices are repetition, comparison, contrast, anecdote, examples. Instead of imagery, we typically say description or like detail. So those are some of the more common ones. So when you say how to improve your synthesis score if you've been getting twos, do you mean a 1-2-0 or do you mean a 2 out of 6? First, we want to make sure that we have 3 sources cited because otherwise it drops your score. We also want to make sure that you have plenty of commentary explaining your evidence because typically if we're getting a 1-2-0, our body paragraphs are underdeveloped. So you presumably are including quotes maybe, but you just don't have enough commentary, or your commentary is kind of summarizing what your evidence said. So like if the quote is something like wind energy is 1,164% more efficient, and you say this shows that wind energy is really efficient and therefore we should have more wind farms, that's not enough commentary. I'll probably remember that 1,164 for years because I've used that wind farms prompt so much. So you would want to dig deeper for your commentary. A lot of times, lower scoring synthesis essays, the commentary that students try to provide just summarizes the evidence. So to avoid that, using that same example, let's say that I want to use the whole like how efficient it is. It's 1,164% more efficient. Then I could say, I could start with what I said, like this statistic. So instead of saying this shows, we want to say this statistic, put a noun after the word this. And then instead of shows, let's say showcases. You could say reveals, you could say illustrates. Let's choose a stronger word than shows. So this statistic showcases the extreme efficiency of wind power. Okay. Now I've still just kind of summarized there, but I'd have to continue, indicating that if America were to create more wind farms, we would have more efficient energy. Okay. So now it's a little better. Then I could say something to the effect of, with our concerns about relying on oil, either because we're concerned about depending on other nations or because we don't want to tap into like destroying natural resources in order to get oil in our country. With our concerns about oil, it seems like wind energy would be an excellent solution because of how efficient it is. And you can keep going from there. And then I've already said a few sentences and I've expanded the commentary. So if I were to do that evenly throughout my essay, it would improve my score. Do you have a video on commentary? I struggle a bit. I have a general video of like, here's what commentary is. And then I believe I have videos about commentary for, I definitely have stuff for rhetorical analysis, and I believe synthesis as well. So if you just type in, like, if you're searching for it and you say like Coach Hall writes commentary, multiple videos hopefully will pop up. Do you have any tips for timing for the MCQ? Don't spend too long on any one particular question because they're all literally worth 1 point each. So the hardest question on the test and the easiest multiple choice question on the test are worth the same. Some of my students are going to start with the writing questions because they struggle with pacing. And so they are better with the writing. Like if we look at their accuracy, they're better with the writing questions. However, they don't always have time to finish. So instead, what they're going to do is they're going to start with the writing questions and they're going to take the time that they need for those. And then they're going to go to the reading questions because if they're going to be guessing on anything, I would rather have them guessing on the questions that they're not so good at. What do you think is the easiest way to get the sophistication point? For rhetorical analysis, really thoroughly analyzing the choices in relation to the rhetorical situation. If you're good at creative writing for argument, you can kind of have a narrative, like vivid and descriptive style. Are there writing questions separated and labeled? Yes. So the first two passages should be reading. So these are going to be like a professionally published passage. So it could be contemporary, it could be old, but like they're real. The writing ones are going to say this is a draft. So passages 1 and 2, so approximately the first 23 or 24 questions are going to be the reading. The last 3 passages are the writing. The way you know it's the writing, besides the fact that it's passages 3, 4, and 5, are going to be that it says this is a draft at the top, and also the passages are really short and there's only 5 to 8 questions. Whereas the reading, it's like the passage is probably closer to a page and there's going to be anywhere from 10 to 13 questions. Is 2 examples for Q3 enough? Like 1 for each body paragraph? Technically, yes, as long as you develop them well. Some students do like 2 examples per paragraph. It just kind of depends on like what you think you can prove best. How to improve your MCQ? Use process of elimination, play to your strengths. So if you're good at a certain type of question, prioritize those. Answer everything, because even if it's a guess, you still have the potential to get it right. If you're looking for like more in-depth MCQ tips, because I know a lot of people have asked in the chat, MCQ is kind of the hardest one to just talk about in general, as far as like rattling off tips, because there's so many things to consider. That I do have a relatively recent video on my YouTube channel. If you search for Coach Hall Writes AP Lang MCQ, it should pop up. I've done previous videos in the past. That one's just like the most updated. The thumbnail is like a white thumbnail with like blue font. And it was published within the last month. So that's the one that I would recommend. Thank you for following. I really appreciate it. Do you need a conclusion for the essays? No. How can I study for the MCQ? The easiest way at this point would probably be to use SAT tests because some of the questions are quite similar. There isn't a lot available for free from like the College Board for AP Lang. There isn't paid stuff either. They are really, really like particular about giving away their MCQ questions, supposedly because they may or may not reuse them. We don't know. Does not having a conclusion affect your score? No, it shouldn't, as long as your evidence and commentary in your body paragraphs is good. Do you get points off for writing the wrong information on the essays? It kind of depends on what is wrong. If you like use the wrong person's name. So for instance, one of my students wrote an essay recently, and she said she was talking about an Olympic gymnast, and she said Gabby Butler. Gabby Butler is a cheerleader from cheer. Gabby Douglas is the Olympian. However, everything else that followed, if I just inserted the name Douglas where she said Butler, everything tracked. And so I did not take off points for that because like I could follow her logic. Also, I happen to know the difference between Gabby Butler and Gabby Douglas, but another AP reader might not, because they might not know about the show cheer and they might not know about Olympic gymnastics. So to them, like, it would be totally fine. So if the name is like close but wrong, that's fine. Now, there have been times where people have like maybe said like Ben Franklin and they meant Thomas Edison. So again, it really depends on like what you say. Like, it depends on like what you got wrong. Sometimes students get time periods wrong. Like if you say something happened in the 60s, but it happened in the 70s, like, but if everything else is fine, that to me is just like a little blip on the radar. Just personal opinion. Do I have to name specific devices? You want to try to name the choices, and use rhetorically accurate verbs. The stream is literally so helpful. Thank you so much. You're so welcome. Like I said, I'm going to try to go live later tonight after my kiddos go to bed to answer more questions, and I will be going live tomorrow, I believe, for a little bit, and then because tomorrow's the day before the test. Wow, y'all. It's Tuesday. Like, it's about to be Tuesday. So yes, your students are so lucky. Well, thank you. I have a great group of students this year. I do every year, but this group is I'm particularly proud of. They're some wonderful human beings. And also our classes are very like, because some people have asked like before, like, what are your classes like? Because I think people think like, oh, she must be just like really not like rigid, but like my classes are like kind of chill in the sense that like my students have told me like we learn, but we don't really realize we're learning. And I try to create like an environment where students feel like they can just be themselves. So it's maybe not what people think it is, but we get a lot of work done. And apparently I make them write a lot. How do you elaborate on exigence? That's a good question. Okay, so the exigence is going to be like the catalyst or like the reason they're speaking. And so like sometimes like the exigence is quite literally like, okay, well, it's a funeral and they're giving a eulogy, or it's a graduation ceremony and they're giving a commencement speech. So you could say things like, considering so and so is speaking at a funeral, or considering so and so is speaking at a graduation, or like whatever the event is. It could be an inaugural address. Considering so and so is being inaugurated. And so it's not really elaborating on it in those cases so much as it's like indicating it. It's like reminding the person reading your essay, like, hey, here's why they're giving the speech in the first place. Do you have any tips to get a good score on multiple choice? I have a whole YouTube video that goes into all my best tips for that. So if you type in Coach Hall writes AP Lang MCQ, it goes through all that. There's so many like little things that you can do, but it really depends on what your strengths and weaknesses are. The biggest thing is answer every question. Do we get points off if we only write 2 body paragraphs? Nope. There's nothing that says you have to write 3 body paragraphs. When mentioning tension, where'd it go? When mentioning tension between audience and speaker, give us sophistication. It can if you actually analyze it. Like if you just say, oh, so-and-so has a tense relationship with their audience, that's not sophisticated. But if you analyze like why they're making certain choices or why they're using certain words because of their relationship, that could be more sophisticated. So and you have to be consistent throughout. But yeah, so if you were to analyze the speaker audience relationship in terms of possible tension or complexity, then yes, that could lead to sophistication. But it's not like the only thing. You can't have just one good line in your essay and make it get the sophistication point. When arguing, is it better to have to be in the middle ground? Not like exact middle, because you don't want to argue both sides equally. They call that equivocating. But I think what you're maybe picking up on is like when students do what we call a qualified response, which is like saying like, while it's true that this, ultimately we need to think about this, or something like, yes, in these circumstances it's this, but in these it's this. So like with the timely decisions, I think a lot of people tried to qualify it like, yes, there are times when a quick decision is necessary, but like ultimately timely decisions are better, especially when it comes to like this and this. So yeah, I think what you're picking up on is like when people qualify their argument. Is it better to write 2 very strong body paragraphs or 3 mediocre ones? 2 strong body paragraphs. Because like, if they're mediocre, it depends on how mediocre, because if they're not getting the job done, then the strong ones are better. How should you go about reading the synthesis sources? Couple tips. If you know you're not going to use it, don't keep reading it. Some people say once you find your 3, stop reading, but I don't totally love that advice, because what if like one of the ones you skip is actually really good for your argument? If you don't understand a visual text initially, like let's say it's one of the first sources and you're like, I don't know how I would use this, skip it and come back to it, because a visual text is going to be things like a chart, a picture, cartoon. Like if you're like, oh, I don't know how to use this, usually there's something in one of the other sources that basically connects to it, and you can kind of see, okay, like, yeah, this is how they relate. And then you can use 2 sources in that paragraph if that's your main idea. Other tips for synthesis, take good notes. And I don't mean like underline a bunch of stuff per se. What I mean is like maybe make like a T chart, or like right at the top, like the main idea, or like you want to just kind of help yourself remember which sources said which thing. So staying organized can help. You can, if you're struggling with pacing, you can kind of skim the sources. So if it's got a lot of paragraphs, you can read the first paragraph and then look at the topic sentences, and that can help as well, because that way you at least like kind of know the gist of it, and then you can decide, yeah, I need to go back and read this more thoroughly, or no, I don't. Should you develop your stance on your synthesis before or after you read the sources? That is a great question. So when I first started teaching, they told us have students develop a stance before. So that's exactly what I did. And I gave my students one of the College Board prompts from like way back in like 2008 or something. And it was all about like privatizing space exploration. And so my students came up with 4 or 5 great main ideas. Then we read the sources, and none of the stuff we were going to talk about was supported by the sources. My kids are like, so now what? And I was like, well, now I'm questioning what I was told at this workshop that I went to. So here's the thing. I think it's good to have an opinion. Like for instance, when I give my students the cursive writing prompt, and it says like something to the effect of develop a position on the role of cursive today. I'm like, all right, guys, what do we think? Is it relevant? Like to what extent? Super relevant, not relevant at all. And most of my students are like, I don't even write in cursive anymore. I'm leaning towards not relevant. I'm like, okay, great. Then we read the sources, and I've had students be like, look, I think cursive is stupid, but I can prove that it's fantastic with these sources. So in that case, go where the sources lead you, in my opinion. Just write the most convincing essay possible. How many sources do you need if you're going to write 2 body paragraphs? You need 3 regardless. You need at least 3 sources regardless. Always have 3 sources for a synthesis essay. How do you integrate a picture? Oh, okay. So you could say something like, as seen in the photograph from blah, blah, blah. And then cite it as like source A, whatever it is. That works. But you could just kind of make a claim that's supported by the picture and then just cite it. So for instance, in the wind farm prompt, if you look at the picture of the wind farm, you can tell that it needs a lot of space and an open flat land. So if I made the claim, when considering a wind farm, one must consider that space is a top priority, because wind farms require a large, flat, open area in order to be most successful. I could cite the picture, because the picture shows that you need a large, flat area. So I don't even have to say it's a picture. So that's a couple ways to do it. What do you predict the argument essay will be centered around? Okay, I don't know what it'll be around, but I'll tell you my fear. My fear is because so many of the prompts have been very like open-ended and philosophical. I'm waiting for them to flip it and be like, assert a position on the value of, and then like some kind of like issue that's kind of related to teenagers, like cell phone bans. Because I think there's an AP classroom one about that, or something to that effect. But you could still argue that with personal experience and things. But that would be like my worst nightmare, because that's the one my students are personally least prepared for. So I'm hoping it's philosophical. Of those philosophical ones, I'm waiting for them to do another prompt like the overrated one. I don't know what it would be, but like that prompt felt very different than the others, and it kind of threw students for a loop. So I'm waiting for like that kind of moment again. Also for rhetorical analysis, because they've done a lot of contemporary speeches by American speakers, I'm waiting for something that's either not contemporary or something from like somebody from another country. Either option I'm fine with. I would much rather it be contemporary though, or I'm waiting for it not to be a speech, like a letter or an article or something. But here's the thing about rhetorical analysis that I have considered is that um, they have to deal with copyright issues. So the prompt either has to be older than 70, or the passage has to be older than 75 years old, and it has to be in the public domain. Or a lot of the contemporary stuff they can use because it's by a politician. And anything by a politician in the US is public domain. So that explains why they choose what they choose, if that makes sense. So anyway. All right. I've been on for about an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm going to head out. And then I will be back on later tonight. I will also be back on later tomorrow. If I didn't answer your question, I sincerely apologize. There have been a lot of them. So thank you for keeping an active chat. If you would like, if you're on TikTok and you want to like ask a question on one of my recent videos, I will be happy to try to respond if I'm able to. And I will be back on later tonight and tomorrow, like I said. So please make sure you're following if you aren't doing so. That way you get notified. Where are you going? I'm going to go do laundry. It's nothing exciting. All right. And so, yes, I will be back on later, but thank you so much for your questions. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And if I don't get a chance to chat with you before the AP Lang exam, best of luck. Write as much as you can. Believe in yourself. You've got this. All right. Bye, everybody. Bye, YouTube.